Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon or good evening, wherever you are located. Welcome to the Globinar Global Risks and Opportunities for Mining and Metals. My name is Gabriela Castro. I am the Executive Director of Global Chamber Metro Querétaro, Mexico. And also, I am the CEO of Trade in Motion, an international business consulting firm that helps companies to enter the North American market, Mexico, the USA, and Canada. And you know what? One of our strengths is the mining sector. So I have the honor to be the moderator in this Globinar. We have two speakers, very knowledgeable speakers, Trevor C. Jones and Marty Weems. We will begin presenting Trevor. Trevor is the CEO of Links Global Intelligence. Trevor's focus is on making environmental, social, and governance, ESG, measurable and consumable through technology. His passion is understanding how mining and metals can be productive, safe, and sustainable by creating empathic space with both communities and shareholders. He holds an MA in International Security from the University of Denver and sits in the Colorado Advisory Committee of the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition and the Board of Directors for the Global Chamber, Denver. Trevor will be talking about ESG, environmental, social, and governance, which is a very important topic lately. Trevor, welcome to the Globinar. Please give us more knowledge of what we have now.
Oh, thanks, Gabriela. I really appreciate the kind intro there. And it's great to always engage with the Global Chamber in any capacity. So thanks for hosting us today for an important conversation. As you mentioned, Links is really engaged in building technology for ESG, and ESG tends to be quite a broad term, right? We're talking about the environment, society. These are these really broad kind of brushstrokes, and I think many of us around the world are trying to really put our finger on what that means. And for Links, that really means building technology that can start to assess some of these issues. Both domestically and abroad. And specifically what we're doing is combining a couple different data sets, both openly available and also private to enterprise, that produces weighted ESG scores. So companies can really just stay on top of both their internal and external regulatory and compliance needs, as well as more ESG compliance regimes kind of pop up here in the United States and around the world. So yeah, we're involved in helping businesses achieve continuity on the ground, avoiding the kind of environmental grievances and that withdrawal of the social license to operate. And we're doing that through some advanced data inputs and building a platform to do so. So it's great to be here, Gabriela, and looking forward to chatting.
Thank you very much, Trevor. So now I will be introducing Marty Weems. Marty is the CEO of Western Rare Earths. With projects in Nevada, Wyoming, and Arizona, Marty leads development of critical materials for national security, 5G, and renewable energy while onshoring jobs into opportunity zones. The goal, of course, is water sparing and recycling, mining and processing of rare earths, and scandium, an environmentally responsible supply chain for electric vehicles, wind turbines, 5G infrastructure, and solid oxide fuel cells. He's a global executive with an MBA and a Master of Science degrees from the University of Tennessee. Marty, thank you very much for joining as a speaker. I know that you are very knowledgeable too, and we want to listen to what you can tell to all people that is attending. Thank you very much, Marty.
Yeah, thank you, Gabriela. Thank you for hosting us today and moderating this panel. Thanks to Trevor for being someone that thinks about this this kind of stuff all day, every day, and gives us puts companies like ours and ones that are much more mature and developed than ours the opportunity to see real data and track and measure and figure out how set a roadmap, follow that roadmap, and then be able to metric that roadmap and stay within the guardrails, so to say. Very important. It's long been considered, ESG has so often been considered this soft science, but it's important to give it KPIs and give it metrics. So I'm glad to see Trevor's organization is doing just that for companies like ours and companies doing a lot more work than we are just yet. So we're a mineral exploration company, which typically in the mining industry means we're a company that does not have a hole in the ground yet. So we'll grow up and we'll get there eventually. We're working towards that with our 3 projects being in Arizona, Wyoming, and Nevada. We're very focused on the rare earth minerals, as Gabriela pointed out, the end use markets for those. Most notably, they're incredibly important to the reduced carbon new energy future. So all those things that are going to save the earth, these are the materials, the raw materials that need to come out of the earth, along with copper and aluminum and so many other important ones, to make those things, to make those technologies possible. And ESG, environmental, social, governance, a lot of times these things get a slide on a PowerPoint. They might have a page on the website, but it's really important that whether it's be it an investor or be it a collaborator, a stakeholder, that they double click, to use the internet terminology there, double click and get a little deeper and figure out where a company's ESG is and where it's going. And a big thing we're trying to be focused on is to not just chase where regulation and expectations are today, but to look forward and kind of in the words of Wayne Gretzky, the great hockey player, skate to where the puck is going to be. Understand what are the prevailing winds, what are the trends, where's it going, because projects like ours can be measured in decades in terms of when they get open, or even especially when they produce. So we need to have an eye to the future and understand not just what are ESG expectations today, but what could ESG expectations be 5, 10, and 15 years from now, and make sure that those kind of plans are in place. So and the first thing I'll tell you is I'm not an expert. Trevor, probably Gabriela, even more so than me, are much more expert at this. I lean on experts as a business leader to help me with this and don't allow it to be a blind spot. Help us understand what do we need to be thinking about, how do we need to talk about it, but most importantly, budget, people, resources, time, planning, executable deliverables, where the rubber really meets the road and things get done. And I'll be the first to admit, we don't necessarily have all those things in place yet. We're early, and these are things we'll develop, just like a mining plan, just like our pit plans and, construction plans. These are things that get developed in parallel. But they aren't the thing that you do all the other stuff and then go, oh, we need to do this ESG stuff. It has to run parallel with, in my opinion, and is incredibly important, and will only be more so, not just here in Arizona, but globally. I'll end my little bit with this. In Arizona, we like to say that whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting over, and Arizonans think that is unique to here, but the reality is that's a global reality, and will be even more so. But I use that example to say that our impacts, both positive and negative, are global, and we need to think globally as a corporate citizen and how we approach our ESG planning. So thank you, Gabriela, and excited to be here with you today, Trevor.
Likewise, Marty. And I can assure you my geology stinks too. So it goes both ways on that one. And it just goes to show you it's going to take all of us together to try to figure this out.
Yeah.
Great. So Trevor, do you want to talk about something else on rare earths or ESG that you want to share with us, or should we open the communication and I can begin asking questions?
Yeah, go ahead, Marty.
Oh, I was just going to recommend maybe we kind of walk through each, because I imagine we may have a few people on the call that don't really understand what is the E, what is the S, what is the G, and kind of the broad strokes of those. So maybe Trevor, it'd be great if you could kind of set up a few definitions, and maybe, and then I can add a little color from a industry leadership perspective, and we'll walk from there.
Sure. And I really love what you said, Marty, about the kind of domestic versus international piece. I mean, I think, being a good actor here, at home, of course, is important. But I think even more importantly, these issues are very similar for mining companies globally, right? And whether you're at the exploration phase or operational, or especially even legacy, we have some mines here in Colorado that the entities involved are responsible in perpetuity forever for those assets. So wherever you are along the kind of operational cycle, life cycle of the mine, or geographically around the world, the ESG issues stay somewhat consistent, right? And so what are those, right? So water and tailings, of course, is the banner risk, right? Whether we talk to ICMM in London, or hyper large mining companies, or explorers, or whatever happens to be, clearly understanding. And I love how you said it, Marty, like at the beginning of the life cycle, right? Let's not wait until operations to really understand the above surface or outside the perimeter risks. So of course, a lot of pre-planning on the exploration side, but of course, as you move through kind of diligence and operations, just really sound water and tailings management tends to be the main issue we hear about globally speaking, and also here in the Western United States, where you are, where I am, water is paramount, right? I think you can recall events at the Colorado legislature, people bringing their firearms one day because they were so heated about the water situation. So not very dissimilar to situations we see abroad as well. Deforestation tends to be a big one, exploration wise, especially in Latin America, Central America, and Africa. Maybe less so here, Marty. I'd love your thoughts on what happens, here in Canada and other adjacent markets. And Gabriela, I know you work in those markets as well, with mining, but certainly deforestation, dust and explosive vibrations, of course, for local communities. And then, generally speaking, there's the kind of attitude of the company. So the perceived E, right there. Are they driving trucks through town, creating a lot of dust at 1 p.m., 1 a.m., or, is there a different way that operationally we can help the local community perceive those environmental pieces a little better? So those tend to be the line items on the E side. And please, anybody that correct me if I'm missing anything on that E side, but those tend to be the banner issues. And I know one of our advisors might be listening right now, so she might be able to color that as well, because she's got some vast experience in some other markets too. On the social side, what we're really
Trevor,
please, Marty. Please.
Yeah, let me jump in there, and we'll if it's okay with you, we'll kind of walk them one at a time here. And so, and mainly that's because I can't remember all the things you said about environment. If I let you go,
I'll blow through them. Yeah, please go ahead.
So, Trevor's spot on. And, every time I'm in one of these conversations, I learn far much more than I share. So thank you for that again, Trevor. And I think you're spot on. And to kind of weave a little bit of what I said earlier to what you just said, talking about water and dust mitigation. I'll use Arizona as an example. In the state of Arizona, mining and, because it's our history, it's so much of our history, mining and agriculture have a lot of priority on water resources. But into the future, we can't operate on the assumption that that will remain true, especially for a new operation. There may be some grandfathering of other things that are already in operation, but will that still be true for us 10 years from now? I think it'd be unwise for us to make that assumption. So we need to be incredibly water sparing in any kind of planning that we do, very water sensitive, in a very just a very task oriented idea is that traditional dust mitigation, you talked about dust management, is to just spray water on everything. Well, we need to not have that approach. Probably we need to find non-water dust mitigation strategies, and is that a technology opportunity? Does it exist? Where is it? What is it? And try to find that. So, the especially rare earths processing is incredibly water intensive. The way it's been done historically, the modern way of mining and processing rare earths doesn't have to be that way. We can probably use a tiny fraction of the water that would have been required 50 years ago in a project like this, like 10% of what was used 50 years ago, 5% of what was used 50 years ago. So new technologies, new approaches in modern mining make better, much better possible. We need to work on getting even better than that, ideally. So you're absolutely spot on, and those are the big issues. Especially water management and tailings. You're gonna make a big pile of something somewhere. That needs to be safe, and how does it get reclaimed ultimately? So those are really critical issues. And then what are the flora, fauna, bugs and bunnies that we're displacing along the way? How can we take care of them and minimize our impact on those important species, and hopefully help them flourish even better nearby. And then when we come back to reclamation, that the plan is there to bring all that stuff back, as good or better than it was before. So all spot on, and yeah, thank you for the framework there, Trevor. I absolutely agree. Thank you.
Thank you for both. I want to reinforce what you just said, and I agree. I will give you some examples in the mining sector in Mexico. The recycle is huge. I think that many people think that mines really are not using water in the good manner, but I think that mines are recycling a lot of water, and they have really good projects on that. And regarding non-water dust mitigation, that I agree with Marty, I think that the mines are really concentrated in not in using the water in the best way they can. And there are now many good technologies on non-water dust mitigation that are used, at least according to my experience in Mexico, the USA, and Canada, more and more. Mining is changing. Mining, as Marty said, from 50 or 100 years ago, mining was not what mine is now. It's really going through ESG to environmental friendly. Of course, there are things, a mine, it's building a mine. There are some things about the environmental that we are working on, but there is good mining, really, and friendly with the environment, supporting communities, supporting the social side, the environmental side. So I think that mining is done in a good way, according to my experience.
Yeah, I think it's great that you've seen positive examples of mining. It sounds like, perhaps maybe in Mexico, that's, a market where, and I'd be interested to learn where the pressures have come from, whether that's been government top-down regulation or, or as I presume, maintaining that social license to operate. So employing some of the strategies that Marty's talking about, I definitely agree. There's some very, very cool technologies out there. Also paving a road and providing community infrastructure is a double win there because no more dust, right? So I think I'd be interested to learn, Gabriela, where do the pressures come from for the responsible actors in Mexico? Is it from the community that's driving that, or is it more of a regulatory environment?
A lot of regulatory environment.
Interesting.
The regulation in Mexico it's high, and mines are doing what they need to do to do it the right way to get the permits. So it's a lot about government and sometimes the community, but mostly about government. And the mines are doing what they need to do to avoid working in a bad way with the environment. They are doing, I think, that really well.
That's interesting. Yeah, I love it. Do you have some more questions for us, Gabriela, at this point?
Yeah, from the ESG point, that I think it's getting more and more important, the environmental, social, and governance side in all industries, but in mining is getting more relevant. I would like to know, maybe Marty can tell us about how do you work on ESG with stakeholders and shareholders? How is it? Do you talk about this? The shareholders are involved, are both involved, stakeholders and shareholders, on this?
Yeah, it feels like a hard question to ask, Gabriela, and it's a harder question to answer. So, weaving together the interests of shareholders and stakeholders, ultimately, they have to weave together, they have to balance. And it can be a little bit challenging at times because but ultimately it comes down to an educational process, and it's about helping shareholders understand the importance of what the stakeholders are telling us, and that if we don't, their share that they're holding is not going to be as valuable if we don't value what the stakeholders are guiding us towards, so that we can maintain that social license, so that we can, because ultimately social pressures will dictate environmental mandates. I mean, that's every environmental mandate we face is the result of some social pressure. So if you think about in this industry or any other, it's not unique to mining, where the stakeholders are screaming the loudest and pressing the buttons the hardest and impressing upon their government leaders in the strongest fashion, that's ultimately what it drives the regulatory requirements that will come next year and next decade. So if you want to know where environmental is going, you can look back historically and consistently. Every environmental regulation we have really started in the social and the governance sections. And while shareholders would certainly have been pressed back against some of them, there's been so much good come out of listening, adapting, evolving, and working towards good outcomes. Now, we can't just draw it on a whiteboard or put it on a PowerPoint slide and expect everyone to understand. It is a constant and recurring educational process that has to have a very consistent, very well thought out message and execution against it, and realizing that not everybody's going to embrace it right away. We have to keep telling the story. We have to keep telling the why. We have to keep telling the how, and helping people come along to where we need to be. And that's on both sides. We have to educate and develop understandings both on the stakeholder side as well as on the shareholder side of things on the occasions that they maybe don't agree with where and how we ought to get somewhere.
Okay. Thank you, Marty.
I will add this. I'm finding more and more, especially in the areas of ESG, that the really savvy, really heavy hitters lean into ESG, and they know that companies that do ESG well have a sustainable future
Exactly.
as a company and as a going concern and as a company. Companies that are trying to dodge it, push it under the rug, ignore it, fight it, they may be okay on profitability next year and next quarter, but they don't. Their 10-year outlook might be a little shaky.
Yeah, I agree with you, Marty. And the social pressure is big. I agree with you. Do you have something to add, Trevor?
Yeah, I love it. I typically think about the E to the S directionally. So, how is environmental practice affecting social grievance that then can produce that withdrawal of social license to operate? But so I love Marty's thinking in terms of the reverse, right? How, what are the conditions socially and politically to produce environmental change? And, is that perhaps a great focal point for education and advocacy for mining? Because I think most people, that we walk around with our cell phones all day. I just held my cell phone up. I don't think we can see it with my background, but we take for granted, the places and sources for the rare and critical earths that go into the things that are going to ultimately drive the green economy, right? So how to get there in terms of ESG best practices and how to really measure what's going on in the ground so we can best educate and advocate, as Marty's saying. I think that's a great way to go too, because creating that source of truth, so to speak, on the ground for what's really happening, both for community and enterprise and government for that matter, it's just really important. And it's a big project to bite off. It's a lot to chew on, but I think, working with enterprise, of course, regulators, in as much as they're starting to craft these things. We just put out a white paper here at Links talking about the forthcoming SEC regulations for ESG, right? So just trying to get ahead of that. And then in terms of engaging with, shareholders, I love to hear Marty talk about it because, it's not easy, right? These are very new concepts. In some ways they're generational concepts. In some ways they're very technical, but also ESG is this kind of overly broad term that encompasses society and the environment. And we're actually talking about the rocks too. So what are we even leaving out of that conversation? It's not a very targeted term with a well-defined fence around it. So, we kind of feel for folks like Marty at Links, and we also, feel for those in the community that are trying to understand these issues and create a source of truth so we can, move forward together and create win-wins operationally and socially as well.
You're good.
Great. Thank you, Trevor. There are questions if you want to begin with, or we continue. Let me ask something that I've been reading about the 2030 that the UN is launching, and the United Nations is launching. So what do you think about it? How do you see from now to 2030? How are we going to work on ESG? How are we going to arrive? Are we going to arrive to it? It's a challenge. So what do you think? What are we going to do to arrive to 2030 with those expectations?
Yeah, I think, so as Marty said, a 10-year time frame, right? So it's 2021. So we're talking about the next 10 years, essentially. We have this massive demand for rare and critical earths. We're going to have some really successful domestic sources and projects like Marty's. That might not always be the case as well. For as many Western rare earths there are that are forward thinking about ESG and outside the perimeter risk before operation. There's a lot of actors that maybe aren't. So I'm not just saying this. I actually think that, you know, Western rare earths has a great chance of succeeding because they're thinking about these issues ahead of time. But there's a lot of folks that aren't. And so we need a great amount of education and advocacy around this. In terms of the United Nations and the Sustainable Development Goals, you know, those are the kind of macro conditions that we'd like to see for people and planet on the ground. ESG is a really great vehicle for companies and enterprise to help facilitate that. And, you know, frankly, I don't know how you feel about Marty, but I feel a bit lucky to exist in a time where we can kind of place ourselves between community, government, and enterprise to try to create that effect, you know, through truth seeking, not through PR spin or marketing. We're trying to measure these conditions, those kind of line items we were talking about under E on the ground. And so, yeah, I'd love to hear, Marty, what you think about that, how we'll get there. The SDG, Sustainable Development Goals, are a fantastic framework for understanding how to do this. They are not very prescriptive about how a mining company could act to get there. And that's where ESG really comes in. So I don't know, that's my thought, broadly speaking. Not sure, Marty, how you think about it.
Well, I think, you know, if we fast forward to 2030 and look back, one thing I'll say is that every prediction we make today has one thing in common, and that it's that they're all wrong. You know, especially mine. I fully believe that half of everything I'm trying to do is wrong, and I don't know which half, but we're going to figure it out. We are consistently going to look to prove that our assumptions are right or wrong, and not just that they're right, and try to work towards it. I do think that if we were to look only at you know, the news over the next decade, as our source of information, you know, and quite often I do believe that the news is kind of the first draft of writing of history, but the news will say that this time of the next decade will be incredibly chaotic in how we talk about it, how we're going to argue about it, how it's going to be debated, especially in and among governments. You know, and from you know, stakeholders to government, stakeholders to companies. But I can tell you that forward-leaning, forward-thinking companies such as ours, and so many more that are the future of mining, we will remain calm. We will make plans. We will execute against those plans consistently, and we'll continue to deliver shareholder and stakeholder value consistently, and not get caught up in the fray, but rather be focused on consistent execution towards the goal. It'll go a little sideways at times, and we'll recover and we'll move forward. And, you know, when we fail, we want to fail small, and we want to fail forward. But, you know, I'm not foolish enough to think that we won't make some mistakes along the way. Every organization does, every government does, every country does, and how we deal with these things. But as a nation that's a global leader in mining, global leader in economics, global leader in the new energy revolution, you know, we as a nation have to be front and center and making hard choices first. And we as a corporate citizen, both globally and of this nation, need to be a part of that solution, not a part of the problem along the way. We still need these raw materials. It can be done well. It can be done better, certainly better than it's been done in the past. And I believe even better than it's done today. So the short answer is, from the outside looking in, it's going to look ugly, but I think our children will be living in a better place because we're willing to move through that friction. You know, we as a company, as long as I'm the leader, will embrace transparency, and we will embrace that friction as a means of making us better going forward.
Yeah, I agree with you, Marty. I don't have children, but I want to leave this country better than when I was living here. And also about failure, you are right. Failure is an opportunity of learning and growing. No failure, no growing.
Yeah, absolutely. So given the time, would you like to transition to the questions in the chat?
Sure. Okay. Can we really measure all that we need to know with ESG, and how is the industry getting better with that?
Yeah, I'm gonna say no. I would say no, we can't. ESG is not a end all be all solution to everything, right? I mean, ESG doesn't take into account explicit political conditions. It doesn't take into account I actually just got off another podcast this morning about security and ESG. So is that a thing, or is security completely apart from ESG? How do you get there in terms of this simple acronym that we're all throwing around? So I'm gonna say no. We need to. And Marty, I wonder from your perspective if you're probably thinking about a lot of other things in addition to ESG, but maybe that's a useful framework for a lot of things as well. I don't know.
Yeah. So I'm a real believer that there certainly can be some paralysis by analysis. But we need to know as many data points as we can so we can begin to see trends and correlations in what data points matter. And one thing I've learned relative to data and metrics is that sometimes you collect data on something for a long time and no trend emerges, no need emerges. And then all of a sudden one day you have the right new analyst shows up and says, hey, did you guys know this is happening? And it's in your data and it's been there for a decade. And, this is what we're seeing. And we think we could pull, this lever and change this policy, and we'll make 15 other things so much easier that we're all banging our head on the steering wheel as we drive home from work about. So just because a metric doesn't give us perceived value today doesn't mean we shouldn't measure it. So embrace as many metrics as you can, have it available for future mining. Just like our mineral deposit, sometimes you're collecting data that that you're not quite certain where it's going to be. I believe ESG sits in the same lane in that perspective, that if there are metrics that we can capture, assimilate, process in some way, some of that will have value down the road that we can't really envision today. And I mean, case in point is, 15 years ago, if Trevor would have had this business idea that he's leading now, the whole industry would have just laughed at him and said, yeah, that's cute. We'll see you later. But now it's like, everybody's like, wow, man, where have you been? We need you. Right. So, so the, minds change about stuff like this for sure. And the old Chinese proverb is the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. Second best day to plant it is today. I think data collection probably fits in that same vein. The data we collect and measure ourselves against today, we don't always know what that tree is going to grow into, but it's important to plant the seed.
Yeah, I agree with both of you, Marty and Trevor. Thank you for your words. We have another question. Is risk more and more of a factor, and are we making better decisions there?
I'll step on this one first. So, we constantly talk about within our organization the need to collect more data about our projects, about our mineral deposits, and do development and planning work, and it's all about de-risking. We're as a mineral exploration company, and we'll transition to a development company over time as we develop our plans. What the thing that gives us more value as an organization more than any other is actually de-risking our projects. And ESG and our planning and execution around ESG is a critical part of de-risking these projects. So ignoring ESG doesn't make the risk go away. It probably multiplies it. But if we have plans, if we have strategies, if we have execution, we have ongoing engagement with stakeholders, we have governance engagement. We have, we're doing all the right environmental things, not only for today, but for the future. Then we are effectively not only de-risking, relative to the day we will open, we're de-risking, for a decade past that, ideally. So yeah, and yes, risks are greater and more of a factor. Our diminishing water supply is risk. Our labor supply is risk. And ask anybody trying to hire people today, and they'll tell you it is the thing they're struggling with the most. So yes, the short answer is yes. Although we're getting better at a lot of these things, the more we work a problem, the better we get at it. And fast forward a decade and we'll have a different set of risks, and we need to be prepared to embrace those when they show up as well.
Yeah, I think
Marty.
yeah, Marty's spot on, Gabriela. I think the thing about risk too in mining is there's several medium or low probability but extremely high impact risks. So like a tailing failure would fall into that category. And so it's really interesting. Right now, Lynx is talking to some really large banks about how to figure out this exact equation, right? How do we put a value, either de-risking or discounting, based on what's going on at that particular asset. And it's a huge, massive problem that goes across all of those ESG line items. And then how do we sense these things remotely, especially like during last year with coronavirus, you couldn't do a site visit. You couldn't, send a control risk consultant to Nigeria or DRC to check out an asset. So these new technologies are really helping us kind of wrap our heads around that and how to de-risk. And I think the 20-year analogy is really a great one. Companies that get ahead of the kind of above surface and outside the perimeter risks now are the ones that are going to mitigate those, millions of dollars CapEx write-offs later on because, some social or environmental incident happened. So very forward thinking.
Yeah, and only to add some comments, to build a mine is a risk. What's the percentage of mines built after when you have a land and you are doing drilling? What's the percentage of that land to become a mine? So it's very low. So mining, it's a risk too. On building a mine is a risk.
Yeah.
And all what it's involved.
I think in some ways I'm not envious of Marty's position, although I think he's got an extremely interesting job as well, and one that's critical to national security and sustainability. But I'm sure the risks are stacked for you, man, because you got ESG, you have political and regulatory, not to mention what Gabriela is mentioning, which is the productivity in and of itself. And I will say that because of that risk, mining is rightly very focused on productivity and efficiency and also safety, which is paramount. But the ESG risk may not be, because it's a bit longer tail there, that may not be at the forefront at a given time. So yeah, I'm sure the banging the head against the steering wheel happens once or twice, just from a CEO perspective, know how that goes, and definitely feel you on the hiring aspect as well. But yeah, that's I don't know, we got to figure it out together. That's why we're here to help, and that's why also folks like Marty and Western Rare Earths are just critical to the new economy too.
Yeah. One more question. What are some of the differences you're seeing around the world? What are some factors we should be aware of?
I'll jump on this one from a rare earths perspective, if I could, and then Trevor, you could probably speak to the larger mining industry, I would think,
Sure.
especially ESG. So in our space specifically, it's quite a hot button in government circles and media circles to really point to China and a lot of saber rattling and trade war type conversations, especially around rare earths. And it's always easy in our space to point back to the year 2010 when the Chinese effectively cut off supply of rare earths to the Japanese market, and it sent rare earth prices to the moon. And just this extraordinary spike and supply chains were crippled globally in this space. And one thing, of course, that prompted was a lot of exploration work and a lot of new development work, and then prices came back down to earth instead of rare, and things kind of came back to normal. Well, now it's quite different, though government and media will talk a lot about 2010 and the risk of China cutting off the West on rare earth supply chains. And but the reality is that there's a risk there, but it's not necessarily one driven by some kind of malicious intent or geopolitical moves. That's a maybe risk, in my opinion. The almost certain risk, I think, is that China absolutely is the biggest maker of electric vehicles, the biggest maker and user of offshore wind turbines, of new air conditioning units. So these are the big consumers of rare earth materials. So effectively, our risk isn't that they just suddenly stop shipping it. It's that they eat it all themselves. They consume, they are 1.6 billion consumers, not just manufacturers. So they buy this stuff, they use this stuff. They're transitioning at a very aggressive pace to a greener energy economy. So their consumption of these things could very easily outstrip their own ability to produce. And there are certain types of mineral deposits of rare earths that extracting them and processing them is a really dirty chemical business. So much so that the Chinese won't even mine their own, especially the xenotime, the ionic clays in southern China. They've just stopped mining them because it's and when you think about something that's it's too environmentally disastrous for the Chinese to even take it on, that's saying something. So one, they're consuming more of what they produce, and even though they're trying to produce more and more, there's some of their own stuff that they say this is off limits because it's just too nasty. And we're not chasing the nasty types of deposits. We're chasing really clean deposits that are notably not radioactive. So that's the difference. So it's not some trade war problem. It's going to be, they're just going to eat it all. They're going to consume it all themselves, and that's going to leave us without a supply chain. That's not true. I think that's true beyond just rare earths as a supply chain. It's other things. It's going to be steel, aluminum, copper. So many things that we've depended on them to make or mine and ship to us. As that economy and the larger Asian economy becomes more robust consumers, they don't need to sell it to us. They'll buy their own. They'll make it for themselves and consume it themselves and be much more insular. And we'll be sitting over here wondering, how do we get it?
That's just such a fantastic point, Marty, and I'm really glad you went first on that one, because that's folks like me with a kind of a geopolitical risk background tend to do that hot button saber rattling press that button issue. And what you're saying is, it's just so crucial, right? I mean, I think 2/3 of the world's population live in Southeast Asia, right? So if that market scales up, and like you're saying, China's the biggest EV battery, or EV car maker right now, or consumer. So what will we do in that case? And those mines are going to be developed somewhere. And in the case of Western rare earths, you got ahead of the game and fought probably some NIMBYism and other things that we had to get over, I'm sure, to get where you're at. That may not happen. I know in Colorado, where we have a severe sustainability bent, and rightly so. It's why our state's still so beautiful here. A new mine is not going to be a popular proposition in the next 10 years to fill that gap. So how to fill that latency when we experience that supply chain pressure due to demand? And then, I think on the other side of that, if 70% of the cobalt is coming from DRC and then going to China, what are the downstream, or I guess upstream in that case, pressures look on the supply chain for some of these ESG regimes. So if we're building new mines in DRC and Colombia and Peru, is it going to be a US led or Western led ESG regime that's really going to drive positive impact? Or is it going to be a Chinese led regime, which I think, probably all of us can agree that maybe ESG isn't as robust of a conversation there, but please correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. I'm sure somebody definitely could, but yeah, I think all these things combine just to say, where are we going to get these elements? How are we going to do it sustainably, and can we do it quick enough? And I feel like that's really what we're getting at is, this demand curve could catch up to us a lot quicker than we can build new assets around the world or domestically. So it's a big issue.
Yeah, spot
Massive
on.
challenge.
Yeah, I agree that you say, Trevor, how fast can we do it?
Yeah, and I'm not, again, my geochemistry or geophysics is definitely inferior to Marty's and his teams, but from my experience engaging with the mining industry, I know that it takes time. It takes time to do proper work, and exploration wise, especially if we're considering ESG considerations up front, is going to take longer as well to kind of de-risk those potential project environments. So yeah, Marty could probably give a more specific timeline in years, but I just think that it's going to be a question of speed as well.
Yeah, and it's as with most supply chains, when you have this really unique situation that is our industry, in that there's both a market pull and a government push, fortunately, that will help accelerate some things. The reality is it just takes time. Environmental studies take time. Stakeholder engagement takes time. Planning, permitting takes time. It takes time to properly plan, permit, and de-risk these projects and open them safely and responsibly. So now I will not profess to be any kind of supply chain expert, but things I read lead me to believe that there's going to be a pretty serious supply constraint on the not too distant horizon. We're probably about 3 years out from it getting really painful for the market, I suspect. Certainly no more than 5 years out, and it's just a matter of what mines open when, how much production. So it'll fluctuate like all commodities pricing. It'll fluctuate. There'll be times of constraint. Prices will go a little bit silly, and there'll be times that suddenly 2 mines open at once, and they're pushing into the market, and and then there's there'll be a little bit of a dip. But by and large, these demand trends are not going away, and electric vehicle sales, offshore wind, air conditioning, all these things are going up and to the right on their demand curve, and new mines opening to supply these manufacturers are not going up and to the right in terms of getting open and producing. So there is definitely a supply side lag, and what little bit of slack capacity there is in the market globally, I think will end up getting consumed over the next 3 to 5 years, and things will really start getting interesting then. I mean, they already are, quite honestly, but it'll be even more so then.
Thank you, Marty. I think that we need to wrap up. We have 4 minutes to wrap up. So, Trevor, what do you want to add to conclude our participation?
I feel lucky to live at a time where we can kind of be at this confluence between enterprise and government, and communities, try and kind of create impact on the ground. And I'm really liking the way Marty's framing some of these things. It's not, that kind of agents or actors have malicious intent. It's the confluence of all of these demands on our society, on our environment, and on our governance systems. So really, it's interesting how you find yourself in these places, but I think really my life's work has become, either trying to de-risk or discount some of these opportunities based on the ESG factors at hand. And that's just a little small, tiny little piece to play in the broader scheme there. But yeah, we're both awed and at the same time subject to these global macro factors. And so keeping a cool head, like it seems like they do at Western Rare Earth is cool. And Gabriela, just thanks for your insight and also your leadership in the mining industry in North America too. Just really appreciated.
Thank you, Trevor, for your participation and to share your knowledge with us.
Thanks.
Marty, what do you want to tell us to conclude?
Yeah, well, most of all, thank you to the Global Chamber. Thank you, Gabriela, for helping us with this conversation today. Thank you, Trevor, for bringing metrics to a really soft spot effectively. And I'm a data and metrics guy. I like that when we can stop calling everything it's an art. It's like, well, you can measure art too. So let's if there's an opportunity to measure it, let's do that, and let's convert things into actionable plans that can be measured and held to account, and that we can bring some transparency to. So Trevor, thanks for having a great idea for a business, for the industry, and bringing that as a something available to companies like ours, and and especially the big players that are really having direct impact today. So I like Trevor. I'm excited to be alive and working on these problems today. I think we can do better. We can help this industry evolve, and as we evolve, and we can coexist with our planet instead of destroying it. We can bring the resources needed to be a part of that solution, and do it in a responsible way, and do that while increasing shareholder value. It is profits and responsibility to the planet are not diametrically opposed. They if nothing else, if you really understand ESG, you realize those things have to be woven together and be complementary.
Yeah, thank you very much. I agree. We can do business thinking on ESG.
Yes.
And it's a win-win situation for everybody.
Absolutely.
Thank you for your participation. I am honored to be the moderator of this panel. Thank you to Global Chamber for organizing this event on mining. So any questions, please send us a message, contact Global Chamber, and we will be delighted to be in touch with all of you. Thank you for attending. Have a good day, evening, or afternoon.